Hello, everyone, and welcome back to what we have now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt is the single greatest podcast in all of human history. I've looked into the future actually to confirm this, and
Huh.
it holds through for about 4,000 years. I can't go much further than that. Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates. I'm Rob Yates, Director of Communications with Owl ESG, and with me, as always, and today I'm going to say it, Nate, I'm your partner in crime. How's that? How are you doing today?
Sounds fine by me. Yeah, tomato, tomato.
It's something like that.
So
And
I like your shirt though.
yeah, thank you very much. I'm stylish or something.
Nice. That's bright. I like it.
My daughter would disagree. Uh, but,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm wearing sweatpants because people can't see the other half, but it's and
Uh,
then with us today. I'm very excited. As those of you who listen know, we've had some really cool guests, and I've been excited for this one. I reached out to her a while ago, uh, and happy to make this happen. An old friend of mine, an old colleague, someone who I have enjoyed sharing ideas with and sparring over some ideas. But I like being around people smarter than I am who inspire me to think more. Cris Banahan. Cris, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you, Rob?
Uh, no complaints. It's Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or something.
I'm
it's
Yeah,
Wednesday. We're counting the days till Thanksgiving. My kids just keep reminding me. So
oh,
yeah. I'll be at the beach next week. I'm looking forward to that.
oh,
nice,
nice.
nice.
So, Cris is the head of global sustainability and citizenship. Do I have that right at TransUnion?
Hmm.
And here's what you said. You manage the vision, strategy, and execution of TransUnion's global sustainability program. You also teach corporate law, governance, and sustainability at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law.
Yes.
All right. You're just showing off. You've been cited by national newspapers, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Harvard Law Firm, Vermont Law Review. Ooh, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm proud of you.
Some little known institutions.
We originally formed a collegial, I
Colleague.
guess, bond because you could write, and I was always seeking out people that could write, and then I would bother you to write a whole bunch. And you were willing to do so. So I appreciate that. It is really good to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And my understanding is that you have one of the more interesting stories of the COVID years that I have ever heard. Would you do us the kindness of telling everyone what you did when we were all the rest of us were locked in our houses?
Yeah. Well, during COVID, the most important thing was to stay away from people. So I took that ordinance perhaps a little too seriously and decided that I was going to go to the national parks. I had very, very supportive managers that entrusted me to continue doing my work remotely. And so I would take calls on drive to national parks but it worked out great. I visited around 40 different national parks throughout the country, everything from the Southwest up to Maine. I saw a lot of the country, and I'm really grateful for that time.
So I got a couple questions about that. First of all, it doesn't have to be your favorite per se, but what's the one that everyone listening, which park should we go see? Like if we can't see any other one.
Yeah. I would say Big Bend National Park. So that is in southern
Ooh.
Texas. It has one of the
You're
darkest.
giving Nate a big head right now. He's in Texas.
No, I'm just saying, ooh, because Sarah was trying to get us to go to Big Bend next week for Thanksgiving. And I said, there's no way I could do that this year. So anyway, yeah.
And now you're like, maybe.
No, I can't. Not this year, maybe. But we have friends that go there routinely. They have these crazy like teepee tent thing or cabins you can rent and all this interesting. I'm a camper. I do glamping, so
Oh,
I said it has to be comfortable. So anyway, I don't mean to
no, no.
digress, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I like it is because it's so remote. You can really feel like you're communing with nature. And there are some other national parks that are perhaps more glamping accessible and that are frequented by a lot of people. So think of Yosemite, Yellowstone. But if you're looking to go to a national park and really feel that isolation and that connection to nature, I think it's better to go to one of the less frequent national parks. It's also better for the nature. So for the animals, for the trees, the more people that are going to the national parks, it can also impact the ecosystem if it's overextended, if you will. So actually some national parks have been requiring permits for those trails that are super, super popular to make sure that they're not hurting the environment that folks are looking to see.
Well, so putting aside some of the bigger existential impact, what are the differences, like immediate, when you're on the ground looking at a well-traveled park versus one of the ones that is more remote or more rarely visited?
Yeah, so right off the bat, more visited parks tend to have a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, screaming children around. And that does kind of detract a little bit of reflecting on oneself and feeling connected to the nature. There's also different sizes of national parks. Some national parks are rather small. Big Bend lives up to its name. It's really massive. There are different parts of it, different smaller microclimates that are really, really interesting to see. So a lot of these more frequent parks, not to make too many generalizations, but they also have a lot of amenities. If you think of like Yosemite, or sorry, not Yosemite, Yellowstone, it has like the Old Faithful, and you can kind of like walk around, and a lot of boardwalks and things like that. But some of these more remote parks, perhaps the trails are less maintained, which adds to the difficulty, but also to the challenge.
You're more engaged. You're sort of, I follow.
Yeah.
How long were you on average at each park?
So this is the unfortunate truth. I only usually spent a day or two in each park in order to make it work with actually maintaining a job. What?
That's a day or two more than most people at each park. It's an amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the ability to sort of integrate with nature. Nature does not go quietly. Have you seen any of the videos of these tourists that leave the boardwalks at Yellowstone and approach bison?
That girl from Florida is going to be okay.
Yeah, I don't do that though. The National Park Service has several warnings on that. Definitely don't do that.
So, interestingly, you are safer around a large predator like a grizzly bear because they don't see you as food and they don't see you as a threat. So you're not worth it to them generally. But bison see everything as a threat because they are prey. So you're this thing coming at them. You could be a bear. Their reaction is to attack you. I think bison weigh 6,000 pounds and can run 30 miles an hour. Sorry, I'm getting way off on a tangent. I wanted to keep running with that. So we're talking about the local impacts. What changes have you seen? And I know you've been following this in your world for a long time, which we're going to get into in a moment, but the broader impact of humanity. So climate change, plastic waste, things like that. How is that showing up even in places like national parks?
Yeah. So one of the saddest things, I have a bunch of pictures on my phone of dead trees. So especially in the West, there have been a number of different wildfires that have impacted the national parks. But what I'll say even more so than what I saw is what I didn't see. So a lot of national parks that were closed off or limited because of the impacts of natural disasters. So for example, a couple of years ago, a third of Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado suffered a really massive wildfire where a third of the national park was burned down. And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to that national park because now you need a permit to go there because of the extensive damage they're trying to help the ecosystem recuperate. And then more recently, when I tried to go to Death Valley National Park, that was subject to some really severe rain, and it actually destroyed most of the roads to the national park. And
Wow.
so, yeah, I wasn't able to go to that national park either. Grand Teton similarly had flash floods the day that I was trying to go there. So a number of different national parks that were just rendered inaccessible because of natural disasters. And that's obviously very disappointing.
And so the reason we are doing what we're doing, the reason we have gathered here to discuss today, looking for ways to sort of mitigate and perhaps start to reverse some of those impacts. And this is something you've been involved with for a long time. So two things up front. One, and I'm sure you're going to repeat this, but Cris is here of her own accord, though she is a proud representative of TransUnion. She is not saying anything that is representative of TransUnion. Is that a fair way to
These
but it's not
opinions are wholly my own. I'm not,
retweets and likes are not endorsements.
yeah, yeah.
But the other thing is, it's not just your work at TransUnion. You have a pretty good background in this. You want to, before we jump into it, the main topic of the day, just give like a quick overview of what you've done in the realm of corporate sustainability reporting?
Yeah. So before joining TransUnion, I worked in a boutique ESG firm, helping consult around 130 different corporate clients in different industries around their sustainability disclosure. So a lot of experience helping companies prioritize their disclosure, considering different regional considerations. I had customers that were clients that were based in Europe, in Latin America. So I've worked with different kinds of companies, a lot of them focused around industries that impact climate. So major airlines, major car manufacturing, I'm trying to think, some technology companies. So a lot of experience, especially within disclosure.
And which, of course, is the topic for today. The title of this one is going to be The Anatomy of a Corporate Sustainability Report. So as I like to say, the best place to start is at the beginning. So when you're putting together a corporate sustainability report, what's the first thing you look for?
Yeah, so I would start even before the report production starts. When you're thinking of putting together a sustainability report, if you're starting from zero, the first thing I would recommend to someone would be to conduct a materiality assessment. And now folks are calling it different things.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you explain what that is? Because I bet a lot of people don't. Materiality impact assessments, they mean some specific things. So do you mind?
Sure. I mean, and even this idea is evolving right now with the EU and new rules that the EU is putting together or that has already published. But historically, materiality assessment, you might find it under different names. So it might say key ESG topics. It may say important sustainability priorities. Folks call it different things to kind of avoid the parallel with the SEC's financial materiality. But the objective of a materiality assessment from a sustainability perspective is to understand those non-financial ESG factors that can have a financial impact on the company. And so looking at the grand scope of issues, so human rights, climate change, supply chain. And so different industries have different exposure and different levels of exposure to different sustainability topics. You can't tackle everything. The world of sustainability is far too large. You need to prioritize. And so before even starting the sustainability report, having a good handle on what issues are most important to the company is critical in then building out your disclosure.
So that's a process right there. How long before the report is published are you starting your like putting the report together?
About a year. So
It's perpetual.
yeah, it is perpetual. Like, we publish the report, we maybe take a couple of weeks off, and then we do a postmortem and start building the new sustainability report. Because after you publish the report, you have to start doing a benchmark assessment. What are other companies and competitors disclosing on? What is happening in the industry? How has this disclosure impacted or not impacted your ratings with ESG rating agencies? What are you hearing from customers? What do you need to integrate now? And and then we do like a mid-year data collection to see how we're trending. So yeah, the moment that we publish the report, we start working on the next report.
That's crazy. So you've got all that information.
Mhm.
How much of it is updating from the last year, and how much of it is new or throwing stuff away? And how do you decide
Mhm.
what stays and what goes?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A lot.
It's the only question I ask.
Uh,
I would say a fair amount is similar to what is collected in the previous year. So in the sense that you're updating metrics, right? Where you're reporting out your performance against any type of climate targets or diversity targets that you have. So you're reporting out progress, like what changed, what worked well, what didn't, that kind of thing. But we're always looking to add new disclosure that can help be responsive to requests that we get from investors, from customers, employees, and helping provide more transparency.
is the standard
Go ahead.
okay, sorry. This is a standard is it yearly publishing that you put it out? Is that pretty standard across the industry, right? Are there people that do less or more? Are there any mid-year updates that are published? Is that something that is trending in the industry? Or
Yeah, so usually it's an annual report. I'll tell you, best practice is to publish it aligned with your proxy, but most companies take around 6 months towards the end of the year. So you'll see a lot of companies disclosing their sustainability reports around May, June, just because it takes a fair amount of time to collect the data and then analyze it. So specifically thinking about environmental data, there's a lot of information that you need to collect from your utilities, and there's frequently a lag of when this information becomes available and when you're able to input it in whatever data management tool you may have. Also giving the team a chance to look over at it, see how the company is trending, and then report out that progress.
Yep.
So something I'm really curious about, because we look at a decent number of these, and there's a fairly consistent, at least mid-range of information that they all have, but they look incredibly different. So when you're putting these together, who are you thinking about as your audience, and how much does that influence not just what goes in, but down to the structure? Like, should we put a graphic here? Should we use bigger font here? Or do you make those decisions?
I love that question. I think it depends a lot on your industry. So what you'll observe is companies that are consumer brand companies, so that are trying to appeal to the wider consumer based market, tend to have more flashy images, pictures. A lot of the language seems more accessible, so they go for a sexier look and feel. I think the trend is going to be in the long term to peel back a lot of that kind of sustainability report and really focus and make it so that it is the same seriousness, the same quality, the same auditability as financial statements and financial reports. So in fact, you're already seeing from the SEC that they're looking at these sustainability reports. They're asking questions. They're finding companies based on what they're representing in the sustainability report. And so the report really needs to reflect the seriousness of some of these other types of reports.
So it's,
in my opinion.
No, that's fair. And it's probably going that way. What I'm curious about is how much conflict, if any, is there between the part that speaks to regulators and the part that speaks to investors?
I don't think there's necessarily a conflict. If you even look at the climate rules, a lot of investors were supportive of getting this kind of disclosure. They're already asking for it. Even the proposed SEC rule is in alignment largely with TCFD recommendations, which is the standard that major asset management firms prefer to see information reported. So I don't think that there's necessarily a divergence in between both of them. I think that they're synergistic.
Okay, that's good to know. There are places where I see regulators come in with good intentions and they sort of over mandate through regulation. And then it's easy for stuff to get left out that investors might be interested in because it's like, we have to follow this exactly. I was curious if that was coming up because when we say ESG, and we've talked about this a lot in this podcast too, it's a massive term. Everyone sort of knows what it is, but no one can define it because it's so broad.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
It's interesting to see what interests drive your decisions.
Yeah, I will say though, I'm speaking perhaps over broadly on regulators from the perspective of a federal agency level. So primarily through the eyes of the SEC, what we're seeing coming out of other agencies like the FTC, other regional securities reporting requirements that align mostly around TCFD. But there are a number of state-specific disclosure requirements that go further than what's outlined by the SEC. There's also other states that are really focused on the opposite side of sustainability. So trying to restrict what companies are reporting out on, particularly looking to restrict asset managers that want to invest in sustainability and develop sustainable funds. That obviously I'm sure has been reported out in this podcast and is something that's widely reported, but even there is a tension, I would say, there at the more state level.
Nate and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. Our particular thing is like, you don't have to invest in a sustainable fund if you don't want, but it's preposterous to eliminate the option for people that want to. It's my money. I should be able to do whatever I want with it.
Yeah, no, I know.
But that's a fair point. That's interesting. And it is burgeoning and it's new. And we did an episode on legal ESG and it's going to be crazy to see where it all goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about the case in Montana of the lawsuit. Was it the high schoolers that I forget? It was Montana that the high schoolers brought it. And the interesting thing there was that they banned the disclosure, right? It wasn't even that they had to disclose it, but they banned them from disclosing it, which I thought was pretty ridiculous, right? So that's an interesting lawsuit. I don't know where it is now, but that's what I was going to ask, and I'm not trying to get controversial. Rob and I talk about
he's controversial all the time.
ESG. But I would think that the SEC would give a bare minimum framework, right? And then the states would go in and make their adjustments. But it's going to be interesting to see state by state. I know exactly what state you're talking about. I'm not going to say it on here, but that's my thought is once the SEC finalizes some of these rules, at least it gives a framework to go off of, and then each state can, I'm sure there's going to be amendments at each state level to do whatever they do. So yeah, that's just, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of folks that are calling for the SEC to preempt these roles and not let the states create their own tailor-made disclosure requirements, because then it creates a lot of challenges.
You operate in one, you operate in the other, all of a sudden you got to meet. But
yeah.
It becomes Kafkaesque. Absolutely.
Cris, did you see the Montana case where the 17 kids sued successfully?
Yeah, I didn't recall it being related specifically to ESG disclosure, though.
So what happened is the Montana legislature passed a law saying that the emissions, the carbon emissions impact was not allowed to be reported when a mining or extractives industry company applied for a permit for a new drill site. So you can't report on it, like not allowed to.
Even though in the Montana Constitution it says you must consider environmental impacts. And so in investing, that's pretty interesting.
All the kids sued for was the ability to see what the impact was, and they won pretty clean, hands down, because it wasn't like trying to mandate something on anyone. It was just, we want to know. It is an interesting case. But we're getting way sidetracked. Okay, so you're what? 2 months in, you've taken your couple weeks off, drank a bunch of bourbon and tequila, I'm assuming. That's what I'd be doing. Recovered from that, done your postmortem, sort of set your foundation and your outline for the next time. What's next? As you're gathering data, how much are you working with individual groups? Are there centralized people that are helping you? How much review and challenge is there?
Yeah, so we shop around our outline. So we prepare an outline on the topics that we want to cover. So usually the bones are very similar, but we'll highlight new sections that we are proposing, and we start gathering data. So it's almost like a hypothesis, the outline, and then we're trying to prove the hypothesis. So we start engaging with different subject matter experts and talking with them, seeing what information they have available. I also have a list of things that we couldn't get within the report. So I'm running like our current report in parallel with the data that we're not able to collect. And then I tell them, that's fine that you don't have the information for this year, but I will come knocking next year asking for the same data. So you should really start collecting that. And so I go through that list also of who told me that they would start collecting that data. And so we go through that process, start developing a draft. We ask for mid-year numbers to see how we're trending, especially in information that doesn't change as frequently. So you can see a lot of variability in energy use, for example, depending, especially during the pandemic, we saw this as people weren't going into the office. Our energy usage dropped dramatically, but that was more from external factors. But other types of data, like human capital data, the composition around how diverse our workforce is, that tends to be slower in terms of changes. So we gather mid-year numbers, and that's a pretty good temperature check as to how the company, a particular company, is trending, and then start developing disclosure. Obviously, we go through a process of verifying those numbers. Everything should be end of year numbers. So where you can disclosing all of that information of the same time period is really important.
Mm.
Do companies do an assessment that goes with it, like we're doing well, we're not doing well? And the reason I ask with risk reporting, and that's what I was doing it at the banks, there's everything has to come with, okay, here we are, here's what our goals were, here's where we did against the goals, and here's how we think we're doing qualitatively. Because then there's this massive review and challenge. That's actually the biggest part of risk reporting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think part of that happens as part of the report, but part of it also happens internally with, a company will probably update its board on how it's trending, depending where sustainability sits within their board. A lot of companies have a dedicated sustainability committee, but those who don't sometimes report sustainability as a topic. So they'll report it out in nominating and the corporate governance committee, risk, audit, and it'll just be an agenda item rather than having a standalone committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get mid-year reports, you're starting to build stuff out. This is a lighter question, but I know when we were doing risk reporting, we'd have deadlines for stuff to be reported from the different businesses or risk lines. And then we'd have our deadline. And some of them would have their deadline like 2 days before our deadline. And it's like, awesome. You're about to send us 3,000 pages of information, and we have 2 days to go through it and turn it into like 6. And I'm dramatically exaggerating, but that's what it felt like. How much of that is there? Like, are you getting stuff ahead of time and sort of set on a progression, or you got some 1 a.m. last minute scramble horror stories?
Well, I mean, there's always colleagues that wait until the last minute to send stuff, especially, sometimes a sustainability report can have around 100 different subject matter experts. So you can't reasonably think that everyone's going to get you stuff ahead of time. I think it's good practice to give people fake deadlines and assume that they will fail at them. And not calling anyone out, but I think that is a good general practice, just having some buffer time for colleagues, because things happen. And they're trying to work on their own projects and deliverables and so forth. But what I think is also very helpful beyond fake deadlines is starting the process early. So it can sound really daunting to start the new sustainability report immediately after you've just published your sustainability report, but especially for areas that you'll want to overhaul the data, starting that engagement early on with the colleagues allows you to have more understanding around the nuances and helps you avoid last minute scrambles.
Are there any industries that are, I'm sure there are any industries that are challenging either because there's so much information or too little information? And are there some industries where it's almost seems like, hey, this is pretty cookie cutter, we can move through this pretty quick? Relatively quick, not pretty quick, but in terms of creating CSR reports and the like.
Yeah.
Or is it just all over the place?
Yeah, I can't think of a particular industry that is easy. I think that there is more ground to cover and more pressure on companies that are perceived to have a larger environmental and social risk impact. So think of mining and extraction companies, fossil fuel companies. In those industries, the stakes are really high because there is so much scrutiny on them. So I think that there it becomes even the stakes are just way higher. Not that they're not in all industries, but those in particular seem to have caught the eye of regulators, and so I think more goes into that.
What about, and I'm actually a little embarrassed, I don't know this, but what about defense contractors? Are they getting scrutiny at that level?
Not that I know of. I know that there was a lot of conversation about that with recent international conflicts, but I haven't worked with a defense contractor off the top of my head, so it's not an industry that I'm super familiar with.
And certainly you see some of the weapon stuff, but and I'll actually probably check it out afterwards if their environmental impact is ever challenged or put under more scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
I think right now it's more of a social impact from what I've been reading the last few weeks, right? The perceptions socially of some of these defense contractors. So I've seen a few news stories here and there in the last, we don't have to dive into that realm but yeah.
In the end, all environmental impact is ultimately social impact, right? I mean, when we talk about ending the world, we're not going to end the world. We're going to end people. The Earth's going to be just fine. It might be a fiery ball of lava. It might be a giant ball of ice, but it's going to go on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When they asked Hemingway who the hero was in The Sun Also Rises, he said, "The earth, which abideth forever." I was like, hey, I like that.
Yeah.
So let's say you're publishing your report with a proxy in April. How long before the April 15th deadline, let's say, and I'm curious because I want like number of weeks, how long is the report finished prior to?
Probably the week before.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. That's stressful.
Yeah.
How long before that do you have to have a draft to all the people who have to approve it?
Like from the beginning? Like the first draft?
Okay.
Like the first,
I don't even know what
the
question to
kickoff
ask.
of like, this is the content of the report.
Let me change the question. How many reviews does it go through up at the top?
I think it depends how many layers you count, but it goes through around 10 layers of reviews. So
I imagine legal, marketing, communications, executives.
Yeah. I'm sure I'm missing some, but it goes through 6 layers of review just in like the SME, the content reviewer, so someone at like a VP level, and then ultimately the executive that oversees that function. And so you do that once in the preview in Q4, and then you do it again in the new year with the confirmed end of year numbers. But so it goes through 6 levels of review that way, but then you also have legal, marketing, design. I'm trying to think other folks that weigh in. I mean, it is quite involved. I'll just say that.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Do you ever get it back from those entities and like, what did you do? And I'm actually asking this prior to TransUnion, because I imagine if you're working at TransUnion, you probably at least have a working relationship with the people. But when you're a third party, you do something, you send it, it ends up on their legal department. Someone comes in, changes everything, and sends it back to you. And you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah. Especially with like prior experience, I think that sometimes it gets lost in between all of the initial intention that their sustainability team tried to put together, whether it was a policy or a report or whatever, and what ends up being the content. It frequently goes through so many layers of review that sometimes that initial intention is lost, it's cut. But that's part of it, right? It's these reports are really a reflection of a company as a whole, as a unit, and you need all the team players to be on board with whatever you're putting out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's published, what's the feedback loop like? You laughed. Why is that? Is that not your favorite part?
Well,
are you nervous the day before it publishes?
Yeah.
Even
I'm
now, I've been
always
writing for
nervous.
25 years, and I send a 500-word article, and I'm like, before I hit send. So I got to imagine.
I mean, like we go through all these layers of review to prevent anything going wrong, but it's always stressful, the thought of I know I did everything I was supposed to do, but what if I missed something? So that I think is always stressful. But so far so good. But your original question was what? I'm sorry.
The feedback loop. Like, do you get
Oh, the
feedback
feedback loop.
from
Yeah.
investors?
So yeah, we get a lot. So I get a lot of feedback in the past. Not a lot, but mostly positive feedback. I think people are generally happy to see a company disclosing any amount of information on environmental and sustainability practices. So I think more information is always welcome. What what I tend to see in terms of getting feedback back, it's like, this is great, and we'd like to see X item, more of that in the future. So that is like the type of feedback, but mostly always positive.
Does that come from like executives, the board, investors?
Yeah, all of the above. Customers. I will say sustainability reports frequently are 100, 200 pages. So for other stakeholders like employees, I think that can be a very daunting idea to go and read a 100-page report. So I think that a lot of the feedback that we do get is understandably from folks that are looking for either a particular metric, customers that are invested because we're in their supply chain. So I just don't think the average Joe is spending a lot of time reading these reports. So most of the feedback is at that level.
That's an interesting take. So going back to the audience, when you're thinking about the audience, how much are you writing this for a more sophisticated audience who's looking for specific things, and how much are you considering that the average Joe, so to speak, could pick it up and at least have a pretty good idea of what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say that the average Joes are very important, but
You don't have to read it, but if they do, you want them to. I'm following.
Yeah, well, no, what I was going to say is that I think that there are more effective ways to communicate with folks that don't involve the sustainability report. So we also draft like sustainability blogs where we cover specific topics, and those are maybe a page. We have internal comms. Sometimes we have videos that we put together. We have LinkedIn and social media posts. And those, I think, are more accessible to the average person that doesn't want to spend hours reading a really technical report. So the audience for these kinds of reports, and again, this varies by industry, like we were talking before, consumer brands are likely to make reports that are more accessible to the general public. But largely speaking, a lot of these reports are more focused on investors, customers, and regulators.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, in all the craziness that you've been doing this for all these years, you got any great horror stories, funny stories, wild things that have happened?
I don't want to underwhelm you. The only thing I can think of is one time a colleague, had an opportunity and left during the production of the report, and that stressed out the team.
Ooh.
Because the sustainability teams famously run very slim, have lots of priorities. And so whenever you're one person down, it just creates, I guess, a lot of stress for the rest of the team. But also a really lovely story of other folks coming together and showing up in the absence of that and lending a hand where they, it was outside their job description, let's just say. So
there's always the heroes come in and help.
I know not
That's-
all
yeah.
heroes wear capes,
That's right. That's right.
We-
Where do you see? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, don't you have a story about your trip to the Bahamas and not saying what they wanted you to say?
Yeah. So there was a Caribbean country that I went to that the regulators were very.
It was in KYC, AML, know your customer, or any
Yeah.
other one.
They were very keen on getting their ratings changed, and we had to stand our ground on that based upon the data that was out there. So it wasn't us making the determination. It was the data that we were getting from reputable sources. In this case, it was a U.S. government source that had long-standing. It wasn't something that came out a few years ago. It had been around for a while, and so they disagreed with the report. And we just stated that you would have to work with that U.S. government entity, and if it changed at the source, then we would happily incorporate it into our system. And furthermore, you could turn that source off if you didn't want it to be included in the assessment. So that was a fascinating
Didn't you
time.
say, they went from sort of really friendly to like, you should probably leave today?
No, I mean, one of them told me, you're a brave man for coming down here.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, I'm not trying to hide. I just, I'm trying to explain. I think, and that's the problem with the ratings versus what we're trying to do at OWL is go to more detailed data as reported. Because ratings, depending on what you're emphasizing and what you're putting weight on, you could have, some pretty disparate results, right? And so one of our projects is consensus scores, which is, wisdom of the crowd. One saying, 10, the other saying 6, one saying 3. Well, where's the consensus around that? So we're not rating it. We're just, aggregating those ratings and putting out a consensus score. But what really we're seeing in the market is people want to see the underlying data. What's being reported? Who's reporting it? You talked about peer analysis. That's huge right now. What are other people reporting it? And what are people underreporting? Where are we leading in reporting? Where are we lagging? And I think that's going to do more for the industry in terms of standardization. Is despite what the SEC and the states do, but there is some of that peer movement, right? Of even by industry, what is this extractive industries, and what are best practices here? What are best practices in consumers? And so, that's what we're saying, and I think that's the better way to go, in my opinion. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but yeah, I've had some interesting talks with regulators in my previous life. So.
Well, and Chris, you say you don't mean to underwhelm, but you actually tell a story there. Like, it's a process. It's getting figured out. I can't imagine what it would have been like working on Equifax's sustainability report a few years ago, or even like Bud Light this year, Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, there's controversy. They managed to make everyone unhappy. It's amazing.
I mean, that onto itself is a very tough pickle to be in. But I think in that kind of scenario, just leading with authenticity and saying we fell short of where we wanted to be. I think from what I've observed at several companies, that seems to be what resonates the most with people.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I have one last question. So go ahead.
No, I was agreeing. It's the trajectory. It's people are willing
Yeah.
to ignore the absolute if it's not too egregious, as long as the trend is in the right way.
Yeah. So for the future of these reports, any changes, any things that look like they're going to be more emphasized, de-emphasized in the reports moving forward? Any insights there?
Yeah. So I think I sort of alluded to this earlier. I my personal perspective is these reports are only going to increase in importance. You're going to start to see them more akin to financial reporting. And there's a couple of things that are pointing towards that. The new ISSB standards that lay out a foundation of reporting that are the sister reporting standards of financial reporting give it that credibility that I think a lot of the ESG data reporting world was missing. And then a lot of the regulations that we're starting to see come out the pike are also requesting third-party assurance. So that, in combination with the new ISSB standards, seems to suggest that these reports are only going to increase in importance and seriousness in, but also in utility. What you've heard, I think all of us have heard, is that they're not comparable. And so this level of structure is going to allow investors, regulators, and others to look at companies apples to apples and be able to evaluate performance.
That was my last question too, is where's it going in the future? Cris, this is fantastic. I don't know if it's a bird's eye, an owl's eye view, perhaps, if you will, but just an inside view into what goes into it, because we're into collecting the data, but we collect the data that's put out in the reports. And so what gets into the reports, how it's chosen, what gets into the reports, is fascinating. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yes, Cris is great.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course, of course. Anything you want to plug? I always give everyone a chance. I don't know if you're selling something. Some people have their social media accounts or their product, but
I don't have anything to plug.
Big Bend National Park.
I was gonna say you didn't make a deal with the national park.
The National Park Service. No, I'm just a super fan of them. I wish.
Or to keep people away, hey, make less people come here. Something like that. So,
yeah, no. I've yet to meet any park ranger that doesn't love their job. Every park I've gone to, when I'm at the entrance, I ask the park ranger, "Do you like your job?" And they're like, "Best job."
Oh, I love it.
That's true. That's true. I actually had a friend that became a park ranger, and he's never once complained to me about his job. So
I made mistakes, is all I can say.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a perfect closing note. Hey, everyone, thank you for listening. Questions, comments, complaints, feedback, hate mail, communications@owlesg.com. Remember, like and subscribe, please. I'm Robert Yates, Director of Communications, with Nate Najara, Head of Product, and Cris Banahan from TransUnion, who was so kind to dedicate some of her time today. Thank you very much. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, folks.
Goodbye.